Hey kids, this is Adam. How you doing? I want to talk to you today about an enigma I've run into, a riddle, if you will, a conundrum. And that's the idea of turn-based games versus non-turn-based games. Is it my turn yet? What the heck does that really mean? This is not a video about Powered by the Apocalypse games. It's not a video about old OSR games. It's not a video about traditional versus indie games and what the hell do those terms really mean anyway. As we've been exploring some Powered by the Apocalypse games, run into this concept of the idea that they are not turn-based, whereas other games are turn-based. We've run into times when we've had procedural difficulty, or we're not quite sure, is it appropriate here for me to make a GM move? When is it my character's turn to do something or to interject myself into the fiction? And make no mistake about it, I think some people have had the impression that from our videos that we've made and our discussions that like these Powered by the Apocalypse games were a failure, or that we weren't running them completely right or whatever. Well, we weren't, I don't think. But the idea is that we had a great time. The sessions were wonderful. I've enjoyed my sessions in the Veil. I've enjoyed my session on Uncharted Worlds. I'm looking forward to doing more of both. That's not the point. I think, for the most part, they were successes. But we're talking about like, hey, what went wrong here at this one point? How can we tweak this and make this better? And I believe that's something that we should be doing in our gaming no matter what we're doing, even if we're just playing our favorite game. Like, how can we make this a little bit better here? What did we do wrong? Did we grade against each other? Did we not quite follow this rule the right way? That's I think, hallmark of a healthy gaming group, to be honest with you, which is diverging from the topic a little bit. Maybe not. So, run to this, and this is conventional wisdom. You'll find this on the internet. A lot of people will talk about the idea that, a Powered by the Apocalypse game is not turn-based, where something like OSR games, well, these are turn-based, or, All for One, Regime Diabolique, that's a turn-based game. And so I look in these games looking for the turns, okay? Now there's something called a turn, when I read Moldve Basic back in 1981, right? But that's 10 minutes of time. You can do so much in 10 minutes of time while you're exploring the dungeon. The only place that I can really find turns, or a sequence, an ordered sequence or procedure, Jason and I have been talking about procedure quite a bit, of play is combat. It's time to throw down, everybody rolls initiative, you do whatever you have to do in a particular game to determine some kind of order, and then everybody takes their turn and declares what their actions are, resolves those actions, and then it's the next player's turn. Sometimes it's the bad guy's turn. Sometimes you defend yourself, even though it's not your turn, because that's what any reasonable person would do when somebody's trying to bash them over the head with a mace, right? There's that turn structure in there. Outside of that, there's very few instances where I see a turn order of any kind. There's a method for parsing out time in some of those old games. But that's it. So we have initiative, we have turns in All for One, Regime Diabolique when we have a combat. We have some kind of turns in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, etc. Play Uncharted Worlds, we have a combat. You have a combat in the Veil. There's not really a definitive turn structure. You can resolve the entire combat in one roll. You can have some level of turns in combat and resolve defending and attacking and all that sort of stuff to a certain extent, even though the player's only the ones that are rolling dice. And maybe someone can jump in and aid somebody else and what have you, and you figure out, okay, well, how does that all happen together? So it's a little amorphous. So there's not that same familiar turn structure. Maybe it's just, when it makes sense for the next person to attack. A la Dungeon World. I haven't played it, but I've read some examples and seen some examples of that, and read way too many examples of people talking about that one on the internet. Not knocking it, just saying. So you can. It's a little bit different, right? Outside of that, those formal moments of combat, say, I don't see the turn structure in these OSR games. I don't see a turn structure in All for One, Regime Diabolique. What I see is a procedure, very much like what's outlined in Uncharted Worlds, what's outlined in Apocalypse World. I can't hold it up because I didn't get a hard copy yet, but I've read it a bunch of times. I see that same procedure that is described on page 14, where the game master describes what's going on. They tell the players what they see. If something's happening in the world, they let them know. Like if two guys burst through the door shooting guns or whatever happens, the players describe the actions of the characters. In my preferred method of play, we act as our characters. We do what they would do. There's no turn order. The closest thing I've seen to a turn order is sometimes you're playing at a big table where the game master has to go, clockwise or counterclockwise. What are you doing right now? Because it's just unruly. I don't like playing at big tables, and that's one of the reasons I don't like playing at big tables, is because of that artificial turn structure, if you will. What happens, in real life, for me, is that people interject their characters into the scene when it makes sense, when they have an idea, when they figure out what they would do. If my character's hanging back and watching this exchange between Martin and one of the Cardinals' guards, I sit back and watch. Maybe Philippe interjects something every once in a while. Maybe he's a bit of a wise ass, but maybe he doesn't say anything at all. Maybe he looks around for something else. Maybe he just sits there and watches. Eloy actually made a great video on our private Facebook group talking about the idea that sometimes, in a sense, it is the other character's turn from a fictional standpoint. There's some sort of scene that's going on where, unless there's some real good reason that your character should fictionally interject themselves into the scene, it's that moment when Martin has that real poignant talk with the minister, or the vicar of some church or what have you, or with a member of his family, and everybody else just kind of lays back in the scene because that's kind of, I hate to say it's his spotlight time, but it's that character moment, and there's no need to stomp all over it. There are other times when it's less about that real poignant moment, and then as you think of something for your character to do, or your character becomes interested in something, then you go do it. You interject it. There's no sequence of okay, now Billy goes, now John goes, now Fred goes, now Paul goes. You just interject yourself into the scene. Lee Rimmer did bring up a good point. He made a comment to Jason's video, the recent video Jason put up about procedure, is the idea, in the lack of any kind of formalized turn structure, the tendency is for the loudest, most vocal person to kind of run roughshod over everybody else. But I don't see that the rules of any of these games prevent that. And what prevents that is the social contract, is the players agreeing not to be jerks, about talking to the players, talking to each other. How are we going to handle things like this? And if Billy starts to be a jerk, we talk to Billy and say, hey, why don't you tone it down a little bit? And you play with the right people. Don't play with the wrong people. Don't be a jerk yourself. Those sort of things. I don't see the need for a formalized turn structure in terms of when is your turn to have your character do anything. We're not playing Monopoly here. It's a role-playing game. You can hear my bias just kind of pop out all of a sudden. But my point is, at the end of the day, I find it a little bit puzzling. I know sometimes that we were hanging back and not acting in these Apocalypse World or Powered by the Apocalypse games, because we were just uncertain. Is it really appropriate for me to make a game master move here? Is it really appropriate for me to insert myself in the fiction procedurally? And I think we've had some private talks. We've had some talks very publicly where I think next time we play, I think we're gonna just kind of go for it. And if you want your character to do something, just do it, and not be as concerned about is it my turn? And it's funny sometimes how we can create a turn structure when there is no turn structure at all. And that's one of the things that's really fascinating and puzzling to me about this whole phenomenon and this whole discussion. But at the end of the day, I don't see a turn structure in either game. There's a moment in a subset of games when they have very granular combat or sequence of events for some other task resolution. When there are turns, there's a step-by-step procedure, and everybody, because there's so many steps, everybody has a turn. But for the most part, in 99% of actual play, I don't see a turn structure at all. And I don't think I want a turn structure either. What about you? What do you think?